Have you ever been stressed, worried, anxious, confused? Maybe all of the above. Are you worried about your next paycheck or your diet? What about your grades? Will they be good enough to get you into that college? Are the deadlines at work piling up? While your marriage is falling apart? Do you feel like a bill is due every day? And with all these repairs, you can never get ahead? Does it seem like the whole world is closing in around you? How can you win the war against worry when you just feel overwhelmed?
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to church. I am so honored that you swam in today. Thank you for getting here. I looked at the radar this morning and I was like, uh-oh. The whole state was covered in the green that they put where there's rain. And so thank you for coming. And I want to give a huge shout out right now to the people in our church who roll up their sleeves and roll up their pant legs to serve. Can you put your hands together for our parking lot team? I love them. Thank you guys so much for serving us so well. Hey, while you're clapping, would you say hello to our Brandon campus who's joining us by video, everybody? We love you guys so much, and we're so glad you're with us on this wet Sunday. Listen, I say this every week, but Sunday is really, it's the best day of the week, and I say this not because I have fun on Sundays, but I do. It's because so many of us, we join together to worship God and to serve others, and there's just nothing better than that, so I'm so glad that you're here. We've been in a series for the last couple weeks called Overwhelmed, and in this series, we've been really talking about the things in life that tend to overwhelm us, things like anxiety, things like time pressure and dealing with stress. And this week I had this realization. I have a lot of friends that as we're entering the summer months, they're in the process of moving and they're moving home. Some of them from in the same city, others of them are moving out of the state. And it's fascinating to me, this one phenomenon. When people are moving, they make the decision what they want to keep and what they want to take with them and what they want to leave behind. But also I've noticed that when people are moving, something weird happens. So often they'll spend time, energy, and money fixing up their house for something that they'll never get to enjoy because they're leaving the house. Have you ever noticed this? I've always thought that was a weird phenomenon. Like, why would you spend time, energy, and money fixing a house that you'll never get to enjoy? Why don't you just do it while you're still able to enjoy it? And in the same way, I wonder how many of us during this series can make the decision that we're going to move into the next season of our life and we're going to leave some stuff behind. And instead of waiting until later in our life to fix up those areas of brokenness, let's just do the hard work of our soul of getting better so that when we enter the next season of our life, we enter healthy and happy and at peace and at rest and with joy. That's my hope for the series. And so week one, I kicked it off by talking about how I really do believe that many of us were overwhelmed by our schedules, and time is so precious. It's your most valuable commodity because you can't get more of it. And so we talked about how do we deal with that. Then last week, my favorite preacher in the whole world, my wife, spoke, and she talked about how we deal with anxiety, and she did amazing. In fact, she did a little bit too good. In fact, everyone, you can get up off my case. She's not speaking for a long time as far as I'm concerned, whatever. But I did want to correct just one thing that she said, because she was amazing, but there's one thing she said kind of wrong. At the beginning of the message, because it was Mother's Day, she told her introduction to mothering. It was the story about when Joey was born and I passed out. And that is a true story. You can go online and listen to the whole story. But she was kind of mad in that moment. And she said that she was mad because when I passed out, the doctor cursed. And she said this. She said, it's sad to me that the first words our brand new little baby Joey heard were it was an expletive. And I just want to correct that because technically the first word he heard was oh, and then the expletive. That's what happened. So I just want to be clear about that one thing. So we're good now. We're good. Yeah. Let's get to work. Yesterday, my wife and I, we were driving, and she goes, "You should be proud of me." And I was like, "Of course, why?" And she goes, I'm on this message board. You see, in a couple of weeks, my wife and I and my family, we're going on a family vacation. If you weren't here, our church, for our 10-year anniversary last year, surprised us so much. And you're blessing us with a family cruise, which is amazing. And we're going next Friday, we leave on that cruise. Or actually, a week from Friday, we leave for that cruise. So almost 2 weeks from now, we leave for the cruise. And Liz says to me, she goes, "You should be proud of me. I'm on these message boards for the cruise, and there are people who are saying they're already packed and completely completely ready to go for the cruise. I'm like, the same cruise we're on in 2 weeks? She goes, yeah. And I've come to realize there's two kinds of people in the world. There are those people who want to pack everything and make sure it's completely ready to go at least a week before you go on a trip. Would anyone like to confess to being like that? You need time and space to clear your mind. Okay, lots of you. And then there's the people like me who pack like as you're walking out the door. You know what I mean? Like you buy into the rule that if you wait till the last minute, it can only take a minute. And so you do it then. That's how I am. And so Liz is more like the first one. She likes to pack about a week in advance for the trip. And so she goes, you should be proud of me. There's people that are way crazier than me. And I had this realization in this moment. Don't all of us do this? Don't we look to our left and our right for people to compare ourselves to? And whether it's that we look to validate our insecurities or we look to the left and right and we feel insecure because of it, we just do this. We all are overwhelmed at times in our life by comparison. The problem with comparison is this, is that when you compare yourself and you find your worth in comparing yourself to other people, you'll always find more ers than you. There will always be someone with more than you. Here's what I mean by that. If you look around, you'll find someone richer, skinnier, smarter. There'll always be someone taller than you. There may be someone prettier than you, handsomer than you, happier than you, or marrieder than you. Not perfectly grammatically correct, but you get the point. It's like that you'll always find someone who's a little bit better than you. And the problem is if you're like me, I'm super competitive. Like I like to win everything. And I'm like Andy Bernard on The Office. If I can't win, I quit. You know what I mean? Like I'm in this thing to win. And so the problem is you'll always find someone more than you, but then you're like me, and so you fight harder because you want to be even superior than people who are like you and in your same season of life. And so you work harder and you do more and you try to achieve more. And the problem is you'll never, ever, ever be able to be that. And even if you are, like even if you move out of the land of into this land, the land of best, greatest, if you land in that world, the problem is eventually someone will come along who is better, skinnier, taller, richer, smarter. There will always be another eventually. And so many of us, the problem is that we find our worth. We discover who we are based on what other people to our left and to our right think about us or say about us or validate in us. We just do. And social media has made this worse, hasn't it? Like, have you ever been on Pinterest and you see something and you think, I'll never be able to do this? When you get home, do me a favor and Google the phrase Pinterest fails and see the things people tried, because you'll just understand quickly that we live in a world where we compare our regular Tuesdays to everyone else's highlight reels. And the problem is, when you do that, it has this way of overwhelming and devastating our souls. So the question I want to wrestle with today is this: what would it look like if we were able to let go of that? Now, if you get nothing else today, if you leave here and you fell asleep 30 seconds from now and you missed the whole rest of this message, I hope you get this one simple thought. This is the whole point of today, is ultimately there's no win in comparison. That there is no win in comparison. You can spend your whole life comparing yourself to someone else, and in doing so, you will rob yourself of the joy of this life. You are created in the image of God, unique and special, on purpose and for a purpose. You may have been an accident to your parents, but you were never an accident to God. At the end of the day, when you spend your life comparing yourself to someone else, you rob yourself and you rob your life of the capacity for joy that you were intended for. There is no win in comparison. Now, if you were to read through the Bible has a lot to say about this. I love that the Bible was written thousands of years ago in certain parts, and yet it is so active and so alive and so relevant and so real to us. In fact, in the book of Ecclesiastes, one of my favorite people to read through the Bible wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, a guy named Solomon. Solomon was way more than you'll ever be. He was the smartest man to ever live, the wisest man to ever live. He was richer than you'll ever be. He had more wives than you'll ever have, and they were way prettier than yours probably ever will be. Like he had it all. He has it all. He builds one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. I mean, you talk about someone who leaves in a massive legacy. Kings from around the world would come and sit at his feet to learn from him. This is a man who knew so much and had so much to say and so much going on. And here is what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. He says, "And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another." Now pause here for just a moment. He says, when I look around, when I observe the world around me, when I see culture and people, I notice one thing, that most of us, we achieve things in our life, and we achieve them for the wrong reasons. We're working to keep up with an impression that other people have of us. And he goes on in verse 5 and he says this. I'm sorry, this is verse 4. He says, "This too is meaningless." He's like working really hard and doing a ton of stuff, trying to achieve a lot of greatness and trying to make a name for yourself. There's nothing wrong with hard work. We'll see that in a moment. But he goes on to say, you can chase the wrong things for your whole life and miss out. And he compares it to chasing the wind. How does one ever effectively catch it? You can't. And so many of us, if we're just honest, this defines us. We're in the rat race. We're working as hard as we can to achieve some level of greatness that at the end of the day may or may not ever matter at all. And Solomon says it's like chasing the wind. And then he goes on in verse 5 and he says this. He says, "Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves." And this is kind of the opposite of the first verse. What he says is this. He's saying there is a place for hard work. And he says a fool, and you never want to be a fool the way the Bible talks about fools. He says a fool, they fold their hands, they sit on their hands, and they do nothing. He essentially says if you do this with your life, you miss out on the opportunities for the giftings that God has given you. But don't spend your whole life in the rat race, and don't spend your whole life comparing yourself to other people. Then in verse 6, he solidifies it with this. He says, "Better one handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind." There's that phrase again. Now pause here for just a moment. Essentially what Solomon does is he gives us a picture, and it's a picture that uses our hands, and he says this. He says, better is 1 handful with tranquility. Now just try to imagine this. Imagine that you have 2 hands that are outstretched, and you have these 2 hands, and he says it's better to have 1 handful with tranquility, which means peace, which means allowing these things in your life that come and go to just kind of flow through you, allowing God to give and to take whatever he wills. Better 1 handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil, than 2 handfuls that hold on as tightly as they possibly can, hoping to hold on to, hoping to maintain the things that they have. The people that live like this, they miss out, in my opinion. That they spend their whole life chasing after something that will never amount to anything. It's like Solomon says this, the goal here is a heart at peace, or a heart in tranquility. Tranquility literally means this, it means satisfaction and contentment and peace. And when you just evaluate your own heart, how many of you would say these 3 words are the definition of your soul? Is your soul satisfied? Is your soul content? Is your soul at peace? Because if it's not, it's possible that you've spent your whole life looking to your left and looking to your right and trying to find validation from people whose opinion may never actually matter. So here's the question that I want to wrestle with today. What do we do about that? Like, how do we move past that? How do we move from a heart that is just finding its worth and finding its identity in the opinions of others to finding contentment, to finding joy, to finding peace, to finding that kind of tranquility that Solomon talks about? Now, to do this, I want to go to an ancient story that Jesus told. This is found in the book of Matthew. We'll get there in just a moment. But here's what you need to know. Jesus tells a story called a parable. Now, parables are fascinating to me because they're not real stories. They're stories that Jesus made up, and he made them up for a point. He made them up for a purpose. And usually, parables have one point to them, just like they just have one point to them. But many preachers like me, we like to pull a lot of points out of them. But Jesus only had one point in this parable. And if you have a Bible, like an old Bible that has headers above it, it may say in your Bible the parable of the talents. The talents we're going to read about aren't gifts and abilities. These aren't like an ability to sing or an ability to dance. Talents are in reference to money And in that culture, a talent could be a measurement of gold or a measurement of silver. The translation we're reading from in the NIV calls it a talent of gold, which, just to give you some context, would be like 30 or 40 years worth of salary. So take whatever you make in a whole year, multiply it by 30 or 40. That's what a talent is worth in the scriptures we're going to read. So we're going to read a bunch of verses, and I'll interact with it a lot. And then we're going to land the plane, and I believe that some of us are going to leave here free from the comparison game. We're going to leave here free today because of what Jesus said in this story, and we're going to find peace and contentment and joy and tranquility. Here is what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 25. Again, he's referring to is the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. He's been in this series of parables. The kingdom of heaven will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants, and this word is so important, he entrusted his wealth to them. Now, I want you to notice this. He doesn't give them his wealth. This isn't a gift. This isn't a charitable donation. He entrusted. He gave with the intention of getting back. He entrusts his wealth to them. And it goes on. To one, he gave 5 bags of gold, these talents of gold. To another, 2 bags. And to another, he gives 1 bag. So one gets 5, one gets 2, and the other gets 1, each according to his ability. So he looks them over and he thinks, you're the most trustworthy, let me give you 5. You're a little bit trustworthy, let me give you 2. And you, here's 1. Okay, let's see how it goes. Then he went on his journey. It goes on. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once, and this is important. He's given this responsibility, and immediately he goes and he puts it to work, and he puts his money to work, and he gained 5 bags more. He takes the investment, the money that was entrusted to him, and he doubles it through his investments. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. So the 2-bagger goes and he gains 2 more as well. But the one who had received 1 bag went off, and he dug a hole in the ground, and he hid his master's money. He just hides it. He doesn't want anyone to see it. And then he says this, after a long time. Now this is interesting because Jesus says this multiple times in a couple different parables. And usually when it says after a long time, what Jesus is saying is at the end of a lifetime. Like try to imagine, this isn't like the master went away for 3 weeks and he came back from his Caribbean vacation. But instead he's saying after a lifetime had passed. After a lifetime, after a long time had passed, the master of those servants returned and he settled accounts with them. And everyone who's in the audience listening to Jesus talk about this, they're like, oh, this is going to be great. Can't wait to see what he's going to do. Verse 20, the man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. He's like, he couldn't wait for this moment. Master, he said, and I want you to pay attention to this phrase, you entrusted me. You gave this to me with a purpose. You put this money in my possession. You entrusted this to me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. It's like he couldn't wait for this moment because he was prepared for the moment the master would return. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. Well done. He goes on, you have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Dilly, dilly. That's what he says. Verse 22. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. He couldn't wait for this moment. Master, he said, you, and again he uses the same phrase, you entrusted me. You trusted me with these things with 2 bags of gold. That's what you gave me. You could have given me 5, but you didn't. But I'm not worried about that because you gave me 2. And I want you to notice what I did. See, I gained 2 more. I'm your boy. Like you can trust me with this. I doubled your investment in me. And his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. And then it's like everyone in the audience when Jesus is talking is like, what's he going to do to the other guy? Like, what's going to happen? It's almost like if this were a movie, the soundtrack changes and you start to hear the Jaws theme song playing, and that's what's happening. Verse 24, then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came, and I want you to notice his language. Master, he said, I knew that you were a hard man. Time out. Hold up. Stop. He didn't say you've entrusted me. He didn't say you've given me certain things of yours. He didn't say that. He didn't say you trusted with me with the idea of me giving it back to you. He says, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. Goes on. So I was afraid, And I went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. And he gives him back the original bag of gold. It's interesting, the first two guys, their response is, you entrusted me. This other guy's almost like, it's kind of your fault. This is your problem, not my problem. You gave this to me, but I know how hard you work, and I didn't want to mess up, so I was afraid. This is really on you. This isn't on me. And his master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. Another way to translate this word wicked is worthless. Like, you didn't add any value or worth to what I did. You worthless, wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I had harvested where I had not sown and gathered where I have not scattered seed? Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers. At the very least, put it on deposit and get some interest. That way, when I return, I would have received it back with some interest. Like, you did less than the least imaginable. And everyone in the audience is like nodding their head along, saying, yes, of course, that makes sense. He says, so take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. Like, this doesn't seem fair, but Jesus is essentially saying, we have to pay attention to the things we're doing. You did it completely wrong, so I'm going to trust this into the person who did what I asked them to do with what they had. He says, for whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. And he goes on, whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And then verse 30, and throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So essentially what Jesus says is, if you're bad with your money, you'll be thrown in hell. Let's pray, everybody, and then we'll dismiss. That's not actually what he says at all. That's ridiculous. What he says is, well, where's weeping and gnashing of teeth? It's places of frustration. It's like I'm going to kick him out of this job. Why? Because he's not trustworthy with what he has. So essentially to Jesus, this is so important. The point of this story is this: what you have is less important than what you do with what you have. What you have is less important than what you do with what you have. He has 3 different people, and he gives them each a different amount. And here's the truth about all of us. All of us, at some level, have been given something in our life. Like, if you could imagine, if we had some sort of a large bookshelf that somehow represented your life, you have a certain amount of time. No matter how much time you have, there's just a limited, finite amount to your time. You have that. And then you have certain giftings and talents. Maybe you're musical, maybe you're artistic, maybe you're athletic, but you have certain talents and abilities and giftings. But beyond all that, you have a certain compassion in your heart. There are things that break your heart. There are things that God gave you that you see that no one else around you sees. And all of these pieces are ultimately what make you who you are. You've been given a certain body. You've been given certain ailments. You've been given certain restrictions. You have a certain makeup of who you are. And when you put all of that together, what Jesus is essentially saying is this: what you've been given is ultimately less important than what you do with what you've been given. For so many of us, what we do is we look around at other people and we say, that's fine, God, but if you gave me her ability to sing, but God, if you gave me his artistic ability, if I could speak in front of people like she speaks in front of people, if I was extroverted the way that he's extroverted, if you just gave me the resources like you gave that person, if you gave me all of the things that I don't have, then I would do something with my life that matters. But the question you have to wrestle with isn't that. The question you have to wrestle with is this: what has God entrusted to you? What are the pieces of your life that make you uniquely you? You are made and formed and put together. The tapestry of who you are is woven together by God. And he's entrusted you gifts and talents and abilities. And the question I want you to ask is not, what do I have, but what are you going to do with what God has entrusted to you? That rhymes. What are you going to do with what God has entrusted to you? Instead of looking to your left and to your right, instead of finding your worth and your validation and your affirmation in the things people say about you, what are you going to do with what has been entrusted to you? I love reading biographies. I love reading stories of people who changed the world with their life, and whether that's because they grew an empire or a business or an industry, whether that's because they rose to kingdom, like, no matter what reason they became famous and notable for some reason, I love reading the stories. And can I tell you the stories that I love the most? It's not the people who were handed $10 billion and they grew their $10 billion to $20 billion. Like that's cool, and I wish I would have that. Lord, smite me with that, right? Like, that's not what I get. The stories I love are the stories of the people who came from nothing. The stories of the people who grew their business and they grew their industry. They had a dream, they had an idea, and they realized their limitations, and they just said to God, God, thank you for what you've given me. I'm going to put it to work. Thank you for what you've given me. I'm going to use what you've given me to make a difference in the world. The question you have to ask when it comes to the comparison game is, where does your worth come from? If it comes from the opinion of others, I just have this word for you. You will spend your whole life in frustration. You will spend your whole life in sadness. You will spend your whole life never feeling like you measure up. But instead, God invites you to find your worth not in what you do, not in what other people say about you, but in who you are. All throughout Scripture, you and I are referred to as children of God. Children of God. Children, people who are born of God, created by God for His pleasure. You and I are children of God. And when you start finding your identity in who God says you are, not in your achievements, not in what other people say or think about you, but in who you are, it changes everything. In fact, here's what will happen as a result. As a result, we need to learn to celebrate what God has given others. And that's really hard for me because I want what other people have, don't you? I want the giftings. I want the resources. I want the 6'9" power forward. I want to be the things that I see in other people. But when you get secure in who you are, when you stop getting out of the wheel, the rat wheel of comparison, you begin to celebrate what God has given others, and then you leverage what God has given you. So my question to you today is this: what has God given you? As you assess your life, as you look at your giftings and talents and abilities and resources, what has God given you? You see, what so many of us tend to do, if I'm just honest, is we look around us and we either find our worth in what other people say or think or do in regards to who we are, or we step on the people around us because we're insecure. Either one leads to a path of devastation. But what would it look like if all of us made this decision? Listen, I find who I am. My security comes not from what anyone else says about me. Therefore, it frees me up. It frees me to celebrate what God has done in others. It frees me to celebrate the giftings and talents in you. It frees me to say, yes, it's amazing. God made you so good looking. He made you with a mind for business that allows you to grow businesses. It allows me to just celebrate who God made you to be. It doesn't infringe on who I am. Celebrating you doesn't threaten who I am. Why? Because at the end of the day, my worth isn't found in you. My worth isn't that I'm a child of God. So I celebrate what God has given to others, and I leverage what God has given to me. What would it look like if all of us made this decision that we find our worth in one place and in one place alone? That we stop wearing the labels of identity that other people have given us, but we get out of this race to try to become something that we'll never actually be. And instead, we found our worth and our value in who God says we are. I'm going to ask you to bow your head and close your eyes all across this room. I'm going to pray for you, but before I pray, I'm going to ask you in this moment of silence and in this moment of contemplation, will you take this moment and would you just ask God, say, God, show me who I am. Show me who I am. Show me how you see me. Let's pray. God, thank you that we don't find our validation looking to our left and to our right. Thank you that our validation comes from you. Some of us, we've gotten ourselves into debt because we're trying to keep up with other people. We've made terrible decisions. We've settled in relationships. We've just done stupid things because we've tried to find our identity in other places than it was intended to come from. God, help us to get out of this comparison game. May we understand there is no win in comparison. It's chasing after the wind. But instead, God, may we find our worth. May we find our validation. May we find who we are in you and in you alone. God, I thank you that you made us unique and special on purpose and for purpose. And God, I thank you that because of that, we can celebrate in other people what you've given to them, and we can leverage what you've given us to make a difference in the world. I thank you for that, God.